Are you making games and you want to create some textures but you don't know how to? Worry not, in this tutorial you will learn how to use Photoshop as a game developer, where we will learn only the tools that we need to create textures to use in Unreal. You will learn how to navigate in Photoshop, how to use the interface, transform objects. You will learn how to paint, how to manipulate layers. You will also learn techniques to modify textures by using the layer effects and masking features. You will learn how to create a seamless textures and export it to Unreal. And finally, you will know how to create an RGB texture mask from scratch. Learn to create an action game in Unreal Engine 5. Start the first lesson for free at unfgames.com. Welcome to the introduction for Photoshop for game developers. Before we start, we need to ask ourselves, why are we learning Photoshop? Well, Photoshop is being in the industry for a long time already. For years and years and years, Photoshop has been used over and over to manipulate textures in games. There will be a time in your project where you want to make some adjustments. Maybe you're using Quixel assets and you want to change some things. Or maybe you want to create a custom texture. Or maybe you want to make some UI for your game like this one. So there will be a time where you need a simple tool that does the job for you. Now, there are other softwares like Substance Designers, Substance Painter, Quixel Mixer, and there are a bunch of tools that allow you to texture without the need of using Photoshop. If they exist, then why are we still learning Photoshop? Well, it's still a great tool. It's easy to use, it's fast, you can make easy adjustments, and you can just import your textures to Unreal and you can just create anything you want. You have the whole control over the texture and what you can do with it. And this is why we're teaching Photoshop, because it's going to be a very handy tool to use. So we're going to start now. We're going to start from the very beginning. And by the end of this tutorial, you will be able to use Photoshop comfortably and be able to manipulate textures, export textures, import them, how to export, how to not export textures, and most importantly, the most common tools you will use for game development, because not every tool in Photoshop you need to use. Photoshop is used for a lot of things like photography, photo manipulation, and all this kind of stuff, which in a way we will use, but there are a lot of stuff that we will use in game development that are very, very common. So with that said, let's get started. Before we jump into all the user interface and what you can do with it, first I want to show you how you can create a new document and what kind of properties you need to use in order to export your textures to Unreal. So if you go to File, go to New, you will be able to create a new document, which is basically a new texture. Now, typically, if you're working with textures that are going to be in 3D models, so for example, like wood or something like that, you will want to make your texture a power of 2. So that will be like 2, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, and so on. You get the idea. Usually 124, 248, 496. Typically, you see this number of textures. So if you want to export your texture, it better be like this. In cases where you don't want your texture to be non-uniform, for example, you want this to be 580 by 252, then maybe this is used for something very specific that maybe is like a sky or something where you don't want the bitmaps to work, and Unreal won't be able to reduce the size of your texture with this. So let's start with the very basic, like 124 by 124. Resolution, you can just leave it at 72. Okay. Before that, one important thing is if you have this in another measurement, like inches, for example, or centimeters, or whatever it is that you have here, make sure you have pixels here. Because if you put centimeters, for example, it's going to be very hard to know how many pixels this is. So let's go back to pixels. And here you have the resolution of the pixel. Okay, 72 is the default, and you want to leave it that way for most cases. Now, color mode. Usually you want to work with RGB. We're going to explain what RGB is in the future, but basically it is the 3 channels that Unreal used to put your textures in: the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. This is very common for computer graphics. If you have this like this, for example, this is usually what you will use for printing stuff, because if you use RGB color and you want to print some stuff, you will see that the colors don't match really, and the printing will look really bad. But in our case, since we're making games and we're gonna print anything, RGB is gonna be our default setting for all the textures that we're gonna use. Plus, 8-bit, it's enough for games. 16-bit, it's too heavy for games. We're not gonna use it. For movies, you can use 16-bit, but for games, we're gonna be constrained to using 8-bit per channel as the resolution of our texture, and that should be enough for us. Then just the background contents, you either want to put the white color by default, or the black, or the background color you have, which is here. We're gonna take a look at later. This is how you create textures, and you just need to click create. And there you go. Now you have a new texture here. Now what we're gonna do is to take a look at what are the most common tools you can use in Photoshop. Let's take a look at the Photoshop interface. So in the left, you have all the tools that you can use here in your canvas. On top of it, you have the properties for each tool. For example, if I will change the tool for the gradient, you will see that on top, the properties will change. And if I go to the crop tool, the properties will change on top. If I go to the move, select tool, everything will change. So depending on the tool you have here, you will be able to see different properties. Now, these are not all the tools that are available. For example, you have the select rectangle tool, but if you hold the left click, you will see that you have other options, such as the elliptical marquee tool. So try to play with the settings here for all the tools that you have, because if you check here, you have the brush, but you also have the pencil, and you have the mixer brush, and you have a lot of other cool tools that are hidden. Whenever you see this little arrow here, it means there are multiple options here where you can hold the left mouse click. Now, on the right side, you will see something like this, where it's, the color. You can choose which color to use. In my case, I'm using the brush tool, so I can just like paint here. And if I change the color here, I can change the hue. I can just click here. And another thing to take note is that if you don't have this layout, make sure you go to the Essentials layout. Or maybe you want a different layout, so you can go to Painting layout, or you can go to the Photography layout, which I've never used in my life, or you can go to the Essentials, which is basically everything you will need for game development. On this part, it's a very important area. You will have the layers. So what are the layers? Basically, it is a system where you can paint something here, and then you can paint something on top, and you can decide how this layer affects the bottom layer. Maybe it's completely opaque and it will replace the layer. Maybe it will multiply the values or subtract the values. So the best way to show you what the layers are, I can just click here to create a new layer. Let me choose a green color and put it here. And now you will see that I'm painting on top of what I had. If you want to hide one layer, you can just click here and you will hide the layer. Or you can go to this part and just change how the layer behaves. For example, like multiply, it will multiply the color. So enough for the layers. This part is basically, we're going to take a look at layers more in depth, but it's a very important part because what you have here, basically, it's the layer that you had selected. The channels, we're going to take a look at it later. Basically, you have the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. And if you saw Quixel textures before, where you have a mask texture, basically, this is it. So we're going to learn how to create our own channels. The rest we don't really need to use. We're going to focus on those two. And with that said, I think that's pretty much the interface of Photoshop. It's really simple, right? Like on top, you have the usual stuff like the file, create new file, open new file. We're gonna take a look at how we can save the textures later. Go to edit tool, the image mode. We're gonna take a look at that later. Layer mode, and you have some filters here. But in general, that's pretty much it. Okay, so this is the interface of Photoshop. Very simple. Now that we have this, we're going to take a look at one of the most common tools here, which is the brush tool. So the brush tool, it's the tool that a lot of people use, especially in game development, because it basically allows you to paint. And if you have a tablet, you can really paint something nice. If you don't, it's going to be hard, but still it's a very handy tool to use. So the brush tool can be found here, and it will be a nice idea for you to learn the hotkey, which is B. All the hotkeys that you will see in Photoshop are visible when you hover over the bottom here. In this case, the brush tool is B, and basically when you press B, you will go to the brush tool. For example, I go here to the move tool, which is V, another useful tool. You can go press B, and now you will be able to paint here. I'm going to just remove this layer by clicking here on the trash icon. And I'm going here, click here and go to the paint bucket tool. I paint here, you will see that everything is green. I can change this by clicking here and paint here by everything white. Okay, basically, it will paint the like the background. Okay, but you can just press here or Control Space, and you will be able to remove everything. Let's go back to the brush tool. So the brush tool here, you have different types of brushes. Now you will see I have more folders than you maybe, because sometimes I used to paint. So I have a bunch of brushes that I like to use. But in general, the general brushes are here. So let's take a look at the hard round brush. If you go here, you can just change the color here by clicking here on the color icon, and let's just paint black for now. And let's create a new layer and just paint something like this. If you go to change your brush, you can just go to soft round and paint something like this. Now notice that the brush you use will greatly affect how it looks. So try to choose wisely. For example, I have some clouds here. And just paint some clouds, which is great. So what are options you have? Well, you have the opacity. And as you can see here, I have the button for allow pen pressure. So basically, based on the pressure I put on my pen, I will be able to control the opacity. But there is a more important setting here that I want you to take a look at. How do we reduce the size of the brush? You can just click here and reduce the size. That's one way. And now we have a smaller size. Or you can right click here on the canvas and you will be able to choose a size. For example, I can make it bigger. Or my favorite way of doing it is using the bracket tools, like the left bracket and the right bracket, to make it bigger or smaller. That's what I typically use. I don't really go here unless I need to change the size by a lot. So this is what I like to use. So I can just paint here, go big, and then go small, and then go small, something like that. So that's how you change the size. The other thing is the opacity. Like I was saying, I was using the pen pressure. Right now I'm using the mouse, but if I decrease the opacity here, you will be able to see that my brush basically has less intensity. And if I choose very low opacity, you will almost won't be able to see what I'm doing. Another thing you can use here that is very useful is you can rotate here. If you click here on this arrow, you can rotate how you paint. So for example, you can rotate like this and you don't see the difference that much, but you can also go here and change the radius of this. So now when I paint, it will look something like this, which is great because when you're painting something, you want your brush to be somewhat have a brush stroke like this maybe, and you don't always want the roundy brush. So this is a great way to just modify the existing brushes that you have to have a completely different brush. Now there are other things that you can do, but I'm going to show you how you can import brushes. So if you go to the internet, you can find like brushes. You can download your brushes if you want. So I'm going to show you how you can import your brushes. You can go here to the arrow, go here, and then go to import brushes. Let's go to the one I just downloaded. And let's just go to clouds. And now you will see that I have my clouds by Mila here. I can just click here. And let me just create a new layer so you can see what I just downloaded. I can do the same thing. I can rotate and change the scale of the brush. And you can see how I can create, maybe using this brush, I can create like a stencil for a decal for my game and things like that. All right. That's pretty much it. I don't use any other tool other than like when I want to paint, I use these things, but for game development, that's pretty much what you want. Of course, going along with the brush tool is the color palette. You can just change here which color you want to use. You can either click here and change the color. Okay, so you have a bunch of options. You also have these swatches, which is like the presets or something. You can just choose one of these. And this will be the common colors you use. This is pretty much what you need to know about painting. To be honest, the pencil tool, I don't really use it. Like, as you can see why. There are not many cases in game development where I felt like I had to use the pencil tool. Uh, but talking about uh, pencil tool, we also have the eraser tool, which is with E. You can find it here. So if you go here, you will see that the eraser tool also have brushes. So if I make it bigger, just like the other one, I can just erase something. Or I can just put a cloud, for example, and erase based on my cloud texture. Or I can go here to my general brushes, the soft round, and I can just start erasing in a gentle way all my textures. So, for example, you want your decal to only be here, you can. This is a great way to do it. Very useful tool. It has the same settings as the brushes, but it's used for erasing. So B for brush, E for erase. And you notice that the brush you have, and when you put erase, it's different than the current brush, right? Like eraser is the soft round. If I go to brush, it will remember the last brush I used. So it's not like you're putting erasing and you need to change your brush again. So that's pretty handy. That's pretty much your tools for painting. It's going to be very useful for making textures, for modifying textures, for enhancing textures to make them look better. So with that said, let's go and find a different tool. Let's take a look at another handy tool you will use very often when making games. Let's just delete these layers for now. And what I can do is create a new layer, and I will go to the rectangular marquee tool. So what I can do here? Well, basically, I can just drag a rectangle, and if I hold shift, it will become a square. So I can just go here. And what it does is basically everything that I'm working on, it will only be constrained within in the area of this rectangle. So for example, if I start painting here, now everything I do that is outside, you won't be able to paint outside. Now that's pretty useful because you can constrain where you want your area to be. Or also you can create like different shapes. Maybe you want to create shapes, and that's also a very handy tool. Now, if you want to deselect, you can go here, select, and deselect. Control D is a very common shortcut you will use. Basically, all the select modes, Control A to select everything, Control D to deselect, and inverse to inverse the tool. So if you want to deselect, you can just go back here, and now when you paint, now you won't be able to paint only within the area of the rectangle. So what other things you have? Well, if you hold here, you also have the elliptical marquee tool. So I can just go here, and I can just paint here if I want it. And you can also inverse the selection, and you will see that now everything is outside. If I paint here, I won't be able to. So Control C to go back, and I can just paint everything outside except for this part. And Control D to deselect, and you get the idea, right? Like we're using these selection tools to constrain what we want to do. Another thing you can do, let me just delete this one and create a new one. You can just go here and go to the paint bucket, and you can either choose to paint with the foreground or the background. So if I paint with the foreground, it will paint black. Now you can click here and paint white, and it looks like there's nothing here, but actually if you remove the background, actually there is white color. So you can change like the foreground and the background color here. And by pressing X, you will be able to switch between those two. That's also a very common tool, pressing X to change the colors. For example, X, 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 X. Then you can just swap between those colors very easily. Now, a thing that I like to use is to use Control Space. It will basically choose the background color I have and fill everything with it. So if I press Control D to deselect, remember Control D is here, I can just press Control Backspace and I will have everything filled with this color. That's the Control Backspace. Or I can press X and Control Backspace and I will be able to fill everything. Now, of course, you have the single row Marquee tool and others, but to be honest, I don't really use them that much. You can just go back here, X, Control Space, and with Shift click, you will be able to add on top. So for example, if I go here, holding the Shift click, I can just add on top of it. And now you will see that my selection will expand to this. And I can press Control Space. And at the same time, I can just press negative. So I can just go like this. And maybe press X and Control, sorry. Let's go back here and press negative. And now you will be able to remove this part. So now you can just Control Space. There you go. So it's a very, very handy tool. Basically, add with Shift, subtract with Alt. That's pretty much it. Now, what you can do with this is use the Move tool to move your selection. Move tool is also a very common tool, so we might as well check it now. We can move the selection, and you will see, because we're moving it, we can see the background. So I can just move this thing here. Maybe I can paint it white. By pressing D, you will be able to go to the default colors. Okay, D is for default. So I can just go back here and paint it black. Or I can create a new layer. Press M to go to the Marquee tool. Create a new layer. Control D. And now I can just move the whole layer. Now, if I go here and add another rectangle, if I press move, I will only move the selection that I have here. But if I deselect this, I will move everything that is inside this layer. Okay, so be aware of it. It's a very handy tool. Usually you want to move things around, mask things, and move them individually. So basically, the Marquee tool and the Move tool go hand in hand. Now we will see another tool here. That is the Lasso tool. It's also very similar, but behaves in a little bit different way. Now let's go for the Lasso tool, which is very similar to. So let me just delete these ones, create a new one. And what I can do is go to the Lasso tool, and you will see that you have the lasso and the polygonal lasso, the magnetic lasso. So the Lasso tool, what it does is basically you can just paint with it and create like any kind of selection. So I can go here, Control Backspace, and I can create shapes. This is you will think like, well, in which case you use this? Well, it has several uses. One of them is to create concept art. So let me show you. Very easy. I can just go back here. Let's say we want to create like a sword or something. You can just go back here and do something like this. Put it like this. And now, because we want very symmetrical stuff, you can just duplicate the layer. I believe it's here. If there you go, duplicate the layer. Okay. And now move it with the move tool. Then Control T for the transform. Right click, flip horizontal. And then you will have things like that. Like interesting patterns, right? Uh, you can create very interesting shapes with this. But let's not go that advanced for now. Basically, what it does is allows you to select something. So, for example, if I go here, I can go to the magnetic lasso tool, and then I can I can remove this, and I can just start selecting, pressing L. I, I will just snap to the surface here, just like that. And if you want to go back, you see that now my lasso tool it's off charts. I can just press backspace and eventually go back to where I stopped. And then I continue. And you get the idea. So with this, you can basically create a new layer and have a more of a accurate representation of what you want. Now, you can think about like what kind of use you want to use this, right? Because if I go here, I can use the lasso. Of course, you need to be very precise for this, otherwise you will have things like this. In any case, polygonal lasso also very important. Lasso tool also. Polygonal lasso basically is step by step, very useful for user interfaces. For example, you want to make something like this. Let's say a HP bar. You want to control space here. There you go. Now you have your bar. Basically, for creating shapes, this may be the best tool you have. And any kind of shape you can create with this space, just like that. So that's pretty much the lasso tool. So with the marquee tool, the lasso tool, and the move tool, we have a lot of options. For example, I can move with B, press M, create something like this, or create something like this. Or I can just go to the polygonal lasso tool. Sorry, not that one. Lasso. You go. Sorry, I created a shape by mistake. We shouldn't see that. There you go. You can start creating shapes. And these are the most common ways to create shapes. You can think about the use case of this for your particular sample, like you're making user interfaces or you're making like icons or something like that. It can really come in handy. For example, you want to make this into a very simplified icon, you can just basically select around this and paint it white, for example, like just a flat color if you want it. And in any case, that's the lasso tools. Lasso and polygonal lasso are common, but I'll be honest, I use them very little compared to other tools. So before we go to check other tools, it's a good idea to take a break and see how we can manipulate the information that we have in our canvas. So basically, you will do it with the transform mode. So let me paint something here. Let me just put a square. If I press the marquee tool, I can go to edit, and then I can go to transform. And you can also see that I have a free transform. We're going to take a look later, but transform basically, for example, you can rotate. You can rotate what you have. You can go to edit, transform. You can skew. Do something like this. You can go to edit, transform, to the distort. Basically, if you like uh, distort the object, very useful. And of course, you have the perspective, like to make things like looking perspective, just like that. Or you have the wrap tool, which is very similar to the FFD modifier in Unreal if we have used it, but instead this is for like 2D. So like you can just move this thing like this, and basically create an interesting shape by using these tools. So you can just click accept, Control D, and there you go. Now you have a interesting shape here. Now all the things that we did, we can also do it with Control T. If we press Control T, we will go into the free transform tool. So what we can do is basically rotate, make it big, do it like this. Basically do the most common operations. Use the free transform. So I can press here to accept. I can press Control T, and basically I can move it, I can scale it, I can rotate it if I go to one of these corners. And I can also right click and choose any other, like for example, the wrap tool. I can just do it like this. Okay. I can also control click here to select all the pixels. And basically you have the transform selection of the free transform. Transform selection, basically it's the, free transform basically. So the transform tool is very, very useful. Another thing that is useful is if you press Control T, basically Control T we're going to use for a lot of manipulation. It's going to be our way to go for here, from here on. You can just right click and flip horizontal. Flip horizontal, flip vertical. And this will come in hand when you want to create tiling textures or things like that, or basically create symmetrical patterns. So you can just right click and flip stuff. That's going to be very useful. So what we're going to do, it's basically move things, Control T, move it where we want, scale it, rotate it, and if we really need it, we can distort our shapes if you want. But usually Control T is for moving. It's going to be very useful. Let's talk about layers, which is the most common operation you will use in Photoshop and the most important aspect of it. The layers is basically your canvas, and what you will have is like a base layer, and then you will have other layers on top of this base layer. You can do operations with these layers. For example, you can combine these two layers. You can adjust the opacity to check how much of this layer will show. You can change the blending mode, or you can just leave it like that and it will be completely opaque and it will override all the layers below. So there are a lot of options you can do with layers. And let's take a look at the most common operations we have with them. First is the create new layer. You can go here to the bottom on the bottom right corner, click here, and you will see a new layer. If you want to create a new layer with a shortcut, you can go to layer, new, and then you can see you have new layer. Okay, so go here, click OK. I normally just click here on the new layer because I don't like the prompt of just go here and, Control Shift N. Okay. So let's delete this layer. You can go here and drag it into the trash bin that you have here. Or you can just press delete and it will delete the layer. So let's paint something here. Let's say we have something dark or something green. something green here in this layer, layer 1 and layer 2. I can paint in layer 2 and then paint in layer 1. There are a bunch of operations that are very common when creating textures and manipulating masks. So if you go to layer, you can go here, you go to merge down, Control E, merge down will basically merge the two layers. Sometimes when you want to combine them, you can just press Control E. That's it. By the way, Control C will undo and redo with Control C. Okay. Other things that you have here in the layer is the merge visible. Will merge everything. Okay. And of course, you also have the duplicate layer. You can just duplicate. But I like to use Control J to duplicate. So there are a lot of things you can do, like Control E, merge, Control J, duplicate, just move it, Control Shift E to merge everything. And we can go to our bracket tool, D for default, X to change the background, Control backspace. As you can see, Photoshop, it's a tool that is mostly used with shortcuts because going here is not exactly the best way to do that. Okay, so what else you can do with layers? Well, let's paint another thing here. Let's find a better color because those ones were kind of ugly. Okay, this one much better. Okay, you have here the blending modes. So blending modes that are very common when creating textures are the multiply, are the overlay, are the soft light, hard light, and that's pretty much it. So multiply will basically multiply the colors. So let me just give you an example. I will just put a gray value here and another gray value here. And what I will do is to change, this was in normal. I can just go to multiply and it will just darken the stuff. So I can, as soon as I continue to do that, everything will become like darker here whenever there is an intersection. There you go. So multiply does makes it darker. In this case, like the brush tool, it's already like doing that for us. If you go here, for example, you want to multiply instead of putting things like, sorry, not here, put it in the red one because the red one is the one on the bottom. You will see that if I go to normal, I will override the color. But if I go to multiply, I will darken the color. So I will multiply by a value of this value. Now, by the way, if you want to check the colors here, just click on here and you will see that you have the brightness. So basically this brightness, what it means is like every color has a brightness. And if you multiply this brightness by another brightness, well, it may become darker. So multiply is very common. Another common is the overlay. So let's go back here. So what overlay does, let's just create a new one here and paint here. If we go to overlay, we'll basically like, overlay the colors here, right? And whenever there's something dark, it will put a color there. If it's something bright, you want. If I put this black, you also won't see it. So it's basically between midtones. It's very useful when you want to change the texture's color. We're gonna take a look at it. And the next one, maybe a screen, maybe lighten. To be honest, whenever I use this, I just try to play with any kind of blending mode until I find something that I like. Okay, so maybe you want to change the color here, something like that, or you can use the vivid light. It's really up to you, or you want to use the difference here. So those are the blending modes. The next thing we're gonna talk about are masks. So let's talk about masking. I have two layers here. One is like a kind of like a sword with some wings, and the other one is like a shield with the sword. And both are very nice images, but sometimes maybe you want to combine those two. Maybe you want to put the wings of this into this layer. So instead of going here to the erase button and just start erasing, you will see that I start erasing what's inside the layer. You notice that, like, let me show you. I erase the wing, for example. It's like, oh, now how can I go back, right? Uh, I cannot like de-erase it, right? Because this is already done. I can only Control C, but in this case, what's easy fix. But in other cases, you will see like, hey, I need to do it all over again. So this is what masking is for. If you go here, you will see like a white block with a black circle in the middle. That means masking. Whenever you do that, you will create a layer on the right. Any layer on the right means that, hey, this is a mask, and whatever there is in a mask, it will affect this layer. So what can I do now? Well, now inside this mask, I can just paint black. Go to black. I can start painting, or I can just go back here. Let me just go back to our soft brush, and I can start painting. So I can paint and then erase the parts that I don't want. Well, let's do it little by little, like this part, for example. And if you want to see how your mask looks like, press Alt and click. And this is basically what it looks like. That's your mask. So if you want to paint here, you can also do that. You can paste images here, you can do whatever. If you want to go back to what you have, and that's it. So let me just paint whatever is left here. And little by little, we are creating the mask for our thing, right? And here I see that, oh, I was painting white. Careful, you don't wanna do that. You need to select this one before you paint. So now you're talking. I think you can leave this part. We can leave this sword and leave this part. And you can press X to toggle between white and dark, the foreground and the background color. So if you want white, it means that you will change how this looks like, and you can be very precise, right? You can play with this because now you can just go back and maybe change something here. Maybe you want the tip to be blue, or maybe not. So just paint black. And you can also use the other tools we have been using. You can use the actually I haven't shown you the quick selection tool. This is a great moment to show you. Quick selection tool will select everything that looks with similar pixels, and with holding shift you will be able to basically choose your selection. So like this, and you can just press Control backspace and it will basically select the pixels for you. Very useful. Quick selection tool is with W. And you can also have the magic one tool, like it will select like the uh, colors that are similar to each other. And you need to go here. Okay, so that's one thing. Let's go back to the quick selection tool. You see, it will select based on what's behind the image, which is pretty cool. Okay, so you can keep tweaking this and forever until you have like a mask you like. Um, but I'm gonna show you something different. Okay, we're gonna leave it like that. Let's assume this is something we want to use, and let's just remove any kind of shadow that we had here. Looks fine to me. So let's take a look at what you can do with this. Now let's keep refining the image we have, but this time we're gonna use blending options. So what are blending options? Blending options are like a filter you put on top of your layer. So if you go here, go to blending options, you can see you have a bunch of styles. Let's put the most obvious one, which is color overlay. And basically this will overlay your texture. And if you use this, now it will be easy for you to check in the mask which areas of your mask are really like, not uh, shouldn't be here because it's very obvious, right? But color overlay is doesn't only overlay the color for entirely. By default it's normal, but you can use the overlay we talk about, and suddenly um now you have this where, yeah, you have your wings that are uh, green, and you can just put a nicer color here. For example, you can go for something like this if you want. It's really, really, really nice. Let's uncheck this. Let's go to the gradient overlay. Gradient overlay, we can put, for example, if we click here, you will have a bunch of options. Let's go for this one. Okay. And you can change the gradient. For example, you can put the radial gradient, and you will see that you have some colors here. Okay. And you can also change the scale of this, the radius. So to make it more obvious, let's change this to green and red. And you can also go here to the overlay. And you will see that you have like a gradient color apply on this. And the great thing about this is that I didn't need to paint anything. Now let's choose a nicer color because this one is pretty ugly. You can go for this one. And you can change, for example, maybe you want something more reddish at the top, maybe more something like this. Maybe this part also needs some refining in the mask, so I can go to the mask, click OK, just paint here because I don't want to affect the shadows. Something like that. Right? Do the same here. Beautiful. Now I have two effects. You can see that they are already here. I can toggle them. Maybe I only want this one, or maybe I want this one. So, or maybe I don't want anything. I can just, toggle this. So let's see what other effects we can do. Now, these two are very common, but also the outer glow. The outer glow, this is not really the best example to show it, but let's just say I put something like a green dot here. Let's go to the effects. Let's go to the outer glow, and you will see that you have like something here. So what it is is it's kind of like it's glowing. I can change the color, like for example this, and I can change the size to make it look like it's glowing, right? So I can just leave it at the white, and I can color overlay and put this into black and put this to normal. And now when I put the outer glow, you will see that it's much more evident. It's like a glowing material. Now let's go back to the original color. You can also drop a shadow. And this is very common, like whenever you want a text to be shown, like you just put the shadow here. So go to the outer glow, drop shadow, there you go. So very, very useful. If you want the outer glow for this to show, it's very easy. Let's see, we want the glow here. We can just paint white. Something like that, paint white. Maybe paint here. And then we can go to the effects and go to the color overlay and put something like this color maybe. And then go to the outer glow. Let's put this color. Okay. And now with the color overlay, you can just put something like this. And then you can change the opacity here, which I haven't told you. You can change the opacity of your image by just going here. For example, this is the mask. You change the opacity to 0. Now there is no mask. Go back here. There you go. Very important feature. Usually it's when you want to tweak some values, like maybe this thing, it's a little bit too much. So let's just reduce it. Okay, so where does the power of effects comes from? Let me just delete this one. I don't really like this one. Okay, let's just go back here and put it on the trash. You can copy this layer by going to copy layer style. If you want, you can paste it here. Paste layer style. And look what you have. Now everything it's kind of like the same, right? So it's really, really powerful because now you can just add any style you want and you go to any layer and you paste it and that's it. And that's very useful for UI, user interfaces. I use it a lot. Whenever I have a style I want, I will just copy the effects and I will put it on all the icons that I want to use. So in my case, like I want this to be more of something like this, right? And because this is so strong for me, I can just reduce the opacity, something like that. There you go. It's great. And now this one, maybe I want to change the gradient or something like I could put it like that, or I can just go here and put something like orange. And I change the overlay. And just like that, you can just play with this. You get the idea. You can just go back to the purple one if you want, or the green one. There is so much choice for you to choose from. So that's something great. These are the layer effects, the blending options. There are a bunch of others like the stroke, for example. It won't notice now, but for example, like if you let me put a text here, let's go to T for text. Let's type something. Hello. And you can see it's hard to read, right? So in this case, you can just go to the effects and just go to the stroke and change the color of the stroke to black. And now you have something like this. If you wonder how I do my Photoshop thumbnails and how I make the text readable, that's how I do it. So there are a lot of effects you can use. Not a lot, but maybe like 10. And this is very useful, especially for modifying textures. creating user interfaces. You can see the power of the layer styling. Here, you don't need to paint everything. You just add some effects, add some masks, change the opacity, and you're good to go. Let's see how you can import textures into Unreal. You go back to Photoshop. I have my Photoshop file. You can use Control S to save as, and you have a bunch of options. But I want to show you that you can actually import Photoshop files into Unreal and it won't make any difference. So if we go save this as Photoshop, we'll ask you to override, blah, 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 whatever. And we can go to Unreal, Control Space, right click, import, and we can just put it here. Now, if you haven't created a material, you can just drag this and it will create a material for you. And that's our texture. So what we can do is actually duplicate this, just like that. And as you can see, I have like a small little dot here, like a black dot. That's because our mask wasn't very well painted. So I can just go back here, go back to our mask, start painting the mask here. Save it. And now when I go back to Unreal, right click, reimport, you will see that it's gone. So you can actually import Photoshop files into Unreal. But let's take a look at what we're gonna do here. We're gonna create a tiling texture. So let's see, how can we import this? We can Control Shift S, and instead of saving the Photoshop file, we're gonna go here and type it texture raw. And now we will import this into Unreal. And now we will put it here. I don't know if this styles or not, but I guess it doesn't because you can see the seam here. And also you can see the seam here. Not the best example because it won't be very obvious. But anyway, let's just stick with it. First things first, if you go to image size, you will see here that we are not using a power of 2. So that's one thing. We're going to create a new image here. New. And we're going to put this as 124 by 124 RGB create. Now this is our square image. If you go to Unreal and you open this texture, you will see here that there is no mip maps. And the reason is you cannot put mip maps when you have a texture that the size is different from a power of 2. So what we're gonna do is do the right thing. Control A to select, Control C to duplicate, go back here and just put it here. Now, you can move the texture around if you want. For example, I don't want this yellow dot. I can just move it like here. And I can go back to the crop tool or press C, press enter, and you will see that underneath you have the texture. We're gonna crop it. Oh, there's nothing. We move it, it's like this. So how do we find the seams? Well, we can go to filter, other, offset, and we can go like 512 and 512. And you can see that now the seams are very noticeable. Well, there is a tool you can use to remove this. Let me just create a new layer. And what I can do is go to the clone stamp tool. Where is it? There you go. And you can access this with S. So if you go here, with Alt, you will sample one part of the texture. And then you can start painting. Let's just duplicate this one, and with Control J, And let's just start painting here. And you can see that I'm starting to remove the texture based on the position of this clone stamp. And I can do the same here. And I can continue to do that. You can hold shift if you want, but I find that it's much easier if you just click here. Go. Right. Wow, this is very confusing. As you can see, I cannot see the seam is not as noticeable as before. Let's just go back to the clone stamp tool. Just find it here. You can do the same here. For example, I want to clone this. I can just paste it like this. I want to clone this hole and just paste it here. If I want more holes, if you want to do so, you can definitely do that. Let's go back to the sample. Let's go to here to the stamp with S, Alt to sample, and you can just go back here. And with Shift, you can just paint all of this. Just like that. And as you can see, it's very, very hard to notice the seams here, because when I zoom in, it's like very obvious, but when you zoom out, you won't be able to see it. And if you want to remove these holes, you can also Alt to sample this and just click here and remove some of these holes. For example, here I had a lot of holes. I don't want that, so I will just sample from this area. You can just click here. I don't want it. There you go. Now, you can make it bigger or smaller. For example, here you can just go to the stamp tool and just make this one big, just so that you have a better idea of where it's basically your seams. Like here, for example, it's not really good place, but here you can just remove this part, just like that, until you find something that it's like you want. So let's say this is the stuff you want. Let's go back to filter, offset, and let's offset it again by the same amount, so we go back to where we began. So let's save this. Another way to save this is Ctrl-Shift-S to save and go here, PNG, and let's just put texture tile. And it will ask for a bunch of options here. Really not a bunch, just one. And by default, large file size, yes. And let's go back. And let's import our new texture, our texture tile. And now if I double click on this and I open the texture, you will see that MIP maps are enabled. And the reason is we have imported a power of 2 texture, which is 1024. So now what we can do is just put this one here. And now we can just put the same material here. Now we don't have any tiling issue, especially even here. Like you see, it's a little bit blurry. Now, there are a lot of softwares that do this tiling fix for you. Like Substance Designer, they have like the automatic seam remover. And I believe Quixel Mixer, I'm not sure if Quixel Mixer has one, but Substance has one. And sometimes you don't get the results you want. Most of the time you do. But it's a Photoshop, as simple as it is a great tool to manipulate textures. And now with what you have, now you can go back here, like let's say put some clouds texture to paint here, and you can just paint like orange. You can just go for something like this. Where is it? There you go. You can start painting like that, and you can just remove the opacity, or you can change the blending mode to overlay or soft light or whatever you want, and you can just save the texture. Of course, I don't recommend to do this, but just to show you that you can, when you go back to Unreal and just re-import, now all your texture will have a little blue dot, which is not good for tiling textures because this will be very obvious. So now that you know how to do tiling textures, there are a lot of things that you already know with Photoshop. One last thing I want to cover is masking. So let's do that now. Now let's talk about how you can create a mask texture. What is a mask texture? If you go here to Unreal, you will see that I have a red, green, and blue channel. And sometimes in the material, just go back and like open this material, you will see that you have the R, the green, and the blue channel. And maybe you want to modify those independently. For example, you want the red channel to do something, and the green channel maybe goes to the ambient occlusion, and the blue channel goes to the emissive. There are a bunch of things you can do. So let's create a mask. It's very easy in Photoshop. So the way I like to do it is that I normally have textures that are independent from each other. So I will create a new file. Let's stick with the same size, RGB color. This is very important. Otherwise, you won't be able to create a mask. Now, if I go here, let's say the mode, make sure it's RGB, odd and 8 bits. Otherwise, you won't be able to create a mask. So what you're gonna do is to go to channels. Okay? So let's create each texture individually. First, let's put the background in black. That's the first thing we need to do because it's a black and white texture. And let's say this is my red texture, red mask. It will be this one. This is my red mask. Okay, not the prettiest thing, but what I will do is to, I'm not sure if I can Control A and Control C. If I do that, I won't have the black image, right? So be aware of that. So what you can do is the Control Shift Alt E, and it will create a new layer based on what you can see. So Control A to select, Control C to copy. Now you can go here and put the red one. There you go. That's the red channel. Let's create a green. So the green one will be like let's create a new layer. Let's call this red channel. Okay. So the red channel, we will put. Well, we can actually do this. Okay. This is the green channel. And now you see that it has colors. Do not worry. I think you can go to adjustments and then go to desaturate. And there you go. Now you don't have colors. There you go. With colors and Control Shift U without color. Right. Now you can use Control Shift Alt E, Control A, Control C, then go back to this one, and this will be my green channel. And they look very similar, so we're gonna do something like a text because I haven't shown you the text much. If I click D, I can write, so I can just put my blue channel. Blue label. There you go. Blue channel. So blue channel here, Control Shift Alt E will create a new channel, and now we can just go back here and paste it. Now this is our mask, which is great. We can just Control-Shift-S, go back to save it as PNG and put a mask text. Now let's go back to Unreal. Let's create let's import the texture first. So let's go to import the mask. Now, when you import a mask, there are some settings you need to change. Whenever you export a texture into Unreal, Unreal will, let's say, adjust the colors so that they look alike in most cases, because every monitor is different. So they need to adjust things. This is what the sRGB does. sRGB basically tells you this is a color texture, and therefore different monitors have different colors, and therefore adjust this for me. So the difference won't be that much. So what you see on the screen is basically what other people will see on their screen, even if it's different. You can change this by unclicking this, or you can go to the compression settings and go to mask, which will does this for you. Mask will mean no sRGB. So now when you go to the red channel, you see this, the green channel, and the blue channel. Okay. So let's create a new material so we can test our create a material. Well, we have a complete materials tutorial. If you want to know more about materials, take a look at our channel or the unfgames.com/quest, and you can find there very easily. So let's just put it mask and right click, and let's just create a material instance here. Let's just put it here. Okay, so mask will use the math test that we use, and let's just say we want different things. So for example, we want this in the base color. So if we apply it, you see that we are using the red channel. If we put the blue channel here, then you will be able to see the blue channel. So what you can do is basically, like, let's just say, press N to multiply, press B to put a color, and let's say blue color. And we will put it like blue. And we will multiply like this. And now your channel is like this. Another thing you can use is use the lerp. So you can go here, put the alpha here, and then the color will be the green color. Put this color here. Let's put it on the V. And let's go back to, we can lerp between those two based on this, this texture. So we can just put this one here, A and B. I know it's a little bit complicated, but just to show you how it will look like. There you go. So the blue, it's inverted. So let's just go back this to A and this one to B. So the blue channel will be here and the green channel will be there. So there are a lot of things that you can use, like, for example, let me just duplicate this, go to the modeling tools. We'll have a modeling tutorial if you're curious. Let me duplicate this, accept, and let me increase the remesh. There you go. And let's go to displays. Displays will use a texture, and this texture will be this one. And just so that we are, you know, yeah, displays intensity 10 is fine. So now you can see we have different options. If I go to the green one, if I go to the blue one, if I can go this to 2, And now you can see that you have the blue channel here, which is great. That's what we want. So you can use the mask for very different reasons. Like you want to add detail or as a texture or as an emissive. Masking is something that is very common in game development. So this is the way you can create masks in Photoshop. There are many different ways. I find this one is the less complex one. It may have a little bit more steps, but it's very straightforward, and it allows you to work with multiple textures and put them in each channel individually.